Hello, everybody. Welcome to From Idea to Insanity. My name is Thomas. If you come across my name or my work, I think the wider Houdini community probably knows me best for my personal work and my sometimes not so sane crowd studies. But as a result, it should be no surprise to anyone that I'm a huge believer in that artists should be doing personal work. I think it's a great excuse to work on stuff that no one will ever have any need for. It's a good way to improve your skills. And I also think if approached correctly, it can also be a benefit to artists' mental health, simply due to the satisfaction of completing projects. So in this talk, I'll attempt to give you an insight into my approach to personal projects, all while trying to convince you that there's actually a method to this and that I'm not just crazy. In the attempt to start convincing you, let's start with some credibility. About me, how I got here, I've been doing 3D professionally for more than 17 years now. I started my career in architectural visualization. I'm a generalist by trade, and in hindsight, architectural visualization proved extremely beneficial because at least back then, when a project got assigned to you, you basically got a set of CAD drawings, and it was your job to go from drawings to modeling to texturing, lighting, post-production, the whole thing, all the way to print or animation or whatever the process was. So that gave me a nice foundation in the world of 3D. Those skills eventually transferred nicely into large-scale public art. As seen on some of these images, when I say large-scale public art, I mean we did everything from about 2 meters to, I think, 55 meters. Everything from artists creating small, cute animals in form of statues to, basically any type of installation. Most shopping centers have exterior installations or interior installations like ceiling installations, all the way to very, very large aluminium engraved war memorials for the royal family in Abu Dhabi. We had the full range. Later on, I eventually moved on to full-time freelancing, where I then got my hands into, the classic motion design and visual effects work. As it was mentioned earlier, the comp department loves to hide everything. So in the corner, there's a crowd shot we did for a Travis Scott video, and it's basically pitch black, which is great. These days, I work in tech, so I've gone full circle. My previous job was at Yahoo, also using Houdini. These days, I work for a company called Devant, which is a remote-first company based in Sweden. Our team is scattered all over the world, from the US, Europe, and myself in Australia. We are using Houdini to generate training and validation data for machine learning networks. These networks are then used for driver safety through the use of inwards-facing cameras in personal vehicles. In Europe, at least from, I think, next year, inwards-facing cameras will become the default of all newly manufactured vehicles. So there's a huge push, as vehicles are still the number one cause of death in humanity. There's a huge push to improve the safety. So think of it like, if you're driving a Tesla already and you take your hands off the wheel, I think it will beep at you and tell you to not do that. Now take that and get it on steroids. These systems, they know how many people are in the car, what are people doing, is there a child seat, what is in the child seat, and obviously there's a huge amount of data needed for these things to do their thing, so they don't get it wrong, because we don't want to mistake a grocery bag for a child. But personal projects. So these are the questions I I get a lot. Like, how do you come up with your ideas, and how do you know which stories to tell? And to try and answer that, I first want to touch on some of the things that I see a lot of people get wrong when they approach personal projects. And probably more so than anything else, the first one is that people go way too big when they start planning a personal project. And you'll see an example later that I can also fall into this trap. But people go way too big, and what that ends up doing is that they either don't or simply cannot finish what they started because it's just completely out of scope. Due to it being a personal project, most people don't have any accountability. And by not finishing it, they also don't have the accountability of uploading it so the rest of the world can see it. And the loop that starts happening is that because having new ideas and coming up with new things to try is always exciting. So people start new projects before they finish the last one because they get that little bit of adrenaline hit when they start something new. But really, they just end up in an unfulfilling and uninspiring cycle where they start something, don't finish it, start something new, don't finish it, and it just keeps going. And they tell me that they like the idea of making personal projects, but they don't know what to make. So what's my secret? I'm writing, there's no great ideas or clever concepts, only fun problems. So what I mean by that is I take like an educational approach to personal projects. Rather than try to come up with some movie or some scene from my favorite movie that I want to replicate or make, I find a small problem that I want to learn or want to try and apply. That can be as simple as a particular node or a technique or anything that can be solved basically. And sometimes the project ends when I have learned how to do a thing, and that gives me the satisfaction of completing it. And sometimes it turns into something larger and more visually interesting. But I complete the loop regardless. I don't end up with anything sort of left. So I want to, through the visuals that you're about to see, I want to try and emphasize that no matter how pretty or how not pretty some of this is, it all starts with a simple problem. And while gathering the material for this talk, I also realized that a lot of my work can actually be categorized into a sort of subgroup of problems. So the first problem type I call effects-driven, which is basically there's a particular effect you're trying to do. So let's just jump into it. So, the business bunny. If it wasn't super obvious, the problem that I wanted to solve here was, can I make somewhat believable snow? Never really attempted it before. So this was my crack at it, basically. And through that process of trying to make snow look like snow and not wet sand or something much more horrible, I eventually came up with this concept of it being a bunny. On the technical side, the numbers you see is it's a giant vellum grain simulation. I simulated 68 million points to a resting state, and then realized that as soon as I started pushing a bunny through it, this wasn't going to fly. So the lovely Papa Wakin came to the rescue, where if I created a sort of a fat VDB version of my bunny, I could use that as basically an activation boundary, and having all the particles in a rest state that basically allowed me to only activate with a buffer around the bunny for the actual interaction of the snow being pushed and snow pushing against itself, which made it all very, very easy to actually simulate in the end. Then the other big number, which is 205 million, is I then took the result of that and ran it through a pop replicate turned it all into a volume. And as you can see, Karma HPU loves volumes. But just to emphasize how the bunny was not, I didn't start off with this great idea of a bunny walking home from work in neck-deep snow. I have a little bit of a process video as well of me trying to make snow look like snow. It used to not be a bunny. Something funny about snow is also that once you start digging into it and you start asking people for opinions, you realize that there's a lot of different types of snow. You ask someone in Sweden or you ask someone in Canada, and you're going to get very different results for what looks like snow. And yeah, this is the final result again. So everything, all the snow is turned into a volume basically and rendered as a very, very, very dense volume. The next project, similar approach. Instead of snow, I found this lovely example online of, it was someone in a Vex wrangle that had created a little snippet that basically created an SDF of whatever you fed it. And it created sort of like an inwards force, like a gravity field, that if particles entered it, it would sort of trap it and keep it in that whatever form that the SDF was creating. So I combined that with the lovely suction gas field to basically pump particles up from the flip sim. And then in this case, it was a deer. And then once they got there, I could trap them in there. And then I had a deer made of liquid. And then, yeah, what do I do with it? Eventually, that then became a cup of coffee. The deer makes a return. This project is, I guess, a slight outlier, as it's actually one of the daily submissions from the Houdini competition run by Side Effects, where it's a 31-day competition where every day is a new entry. So unlike the other projects where I had a particular technique or a problem I wanted to solve here, I guess this day I think the prompt was flow, which then gave me the idea that I wanted something flowing across something, that lines and points. And that was achieved through running a gradient across the model and then using minpos to make sure that things, basically moving things across the gradient using minpos to make sure they stuck. And then once they stuck to the surface, you can just point deform them into whatever you want. Once that worked, you just apply it to everything. So yeah, that became this little nature scene. So the second type of problem is what I call tool-driven. It's basically you take a particular tool or a technique or a result from a node, basically, and then use that as your baseline. Ends. So the tool or the problem in this case here was the new crowd procedural that came in Houdini 20.5, I believe. So the goal was to just test that node, see what I could do with it. That eventually turned into ants. And that's a tiny demo of the crowd procedural doing its thing. It's a lovely little addition. It allows us to render a lot more crowd. So, as I was saying about the trap of going too big too fast, the ants used to not just be ants. I had AI-generated soldiers, The soldiers are sitting on the ants. There was bees, soldiers on the bees. I had a whole storyboard. I was basically creating the next avatar. It went all out. I had like a storyboard where these ants was invading, soldiers were running to the bees. There was a whole, dogfight situation. It completely went out of hand. It was completely out of control. Luckily, I got saved by a freelance job for Nike that by chance happened to also have bees. This job, they wanted a lot of bees, and they wanted them sitting on top of each other in layers, moving around. It's like the recipe for disaster, basically. In my head, when I got the brief, was just legs and wings intersecting everywhere. I think we got away with it. But the approach in the end for completing this job was to basically turn each of the agent layers into an animated VDB that was then used as the ground plane for the next layer of crowd agents. So even though that they all had idle animations and moved slightly, the next layer would basically automatically adapt to that new terrain. And you do that 3 or 4 times and strategically place a few bees that moves to distract you. And I think sort of got away with it. But safe to say that once this finished, I didn't want to look at bees anymore. So the project got scaled back and just became ants, which was probably for the better. Another problem here, the simple problem was that I wanted to explore agent footlocking, which is surprisingly always a nightmare. Every time I get it to work, I start something new and it's just annoying to work with. But specifically, I wanted it to get it to work with things that had more than 2 legs. At the time, I happened to have a crab model lying around, so I started doing tests with that. And somewhere along the way, someone sent me this now very old meme of an armed crab, and then that gave me the inspiration to, I don't know what to call this, but they have weapons. There's no excuse, really. But it turned into something like this. No. Right, so the third type of problem is what I call interaction-driven. And to me, that is probably the most interesting one. It's basically you either have systems or you have different pieces interacting with each other. It can be a car driving into a wall. It can be anything you can really think of. But the key here is that things interact. Some examples of this is turning crowds into vellum, or I guess from the problem point of view, it's having vellum or RBD react to the input that is crowds. Just so much fun to be had with this. And again, obviously, like I mentioned, it gives you an excuse to work on things that no one will ever ask for, nor have any need for. But whether it's people turning into balloons or into paint, or small flying gargoyles, I think they are, turning into stone. There's no end to this. And these projects, or these tests, I guess you can call them, they never really went any further than this. This was as far as they went. But even in this state, I do post them. Again, back to the accountability. Because as soon as you post them online, it's no longer yours. And even though I'm not necessarily even looking for feedback or for views on it, it's more the conclusion or the satisfaction of like, this is done now, whether you like it or not, because you've given it away. And it allows you to both mentally and practically sort of move on to the next thing, which I think is very important, because too often I see people or talk to people that have these like great ideas and they've started something that is actually quite viable, but somehow they've been sitting on it for 5 weeks and it's become this thing and it never turns into anything. Some other fun examples, diving a little bit more into crowds, is setting up systems that sort of have a chain reaction. One of the first things I got to work was this lovely little dog and these pigeons. Basically, there's a distance check on the birds. If the dog comes within a certain distance, they transition and fly away into like a sort of random pattern. And when the dog is far enough away, they'll fly towards the ground and eventually transition back into their idle animation. I love setting up these systems. Like getting systems to work and just hitting play and seeing them do their thing is super satisfying. And it's fun problems to solve as well. The ones next to it is the dragons. Here the problem or the exercise was to have Axiom, thanks Matt, trigger a pyrosim when the character entered a certain animation clip, and even narrower, there's like I'm defining a subsection of basically an attack animation for when I start spewing out particles that then gets fed into Axiom. And even with this amount of dragons, I'm not separating them. I'm not doing anything fancy. I'm literally, if they are in an attack animation, they spit out points, and whatever the total sum is just gets fed into one Axiom solver, and it just goes. It's lovely to work with. The bottom one, the rule here is that the characters they're trying to avoid the boxes, but unfortunately they come at a speed where they don't have time to react until they get hit. But once they're on the ground, they will walk around them. Yeah. And the last one is it was a part of a larger project that never really went anywhere, but I had a larger interaction system where it was actually the dragons from above. The initial particle stream that was used to generate the pyro was then used to generate an RBD explosion on the ground that was then used to trigger the ragdolls of the agents. And much later, I took a lot of this and maybe went a little too far with it, but it looks something like this. So what makes this interesting is that it's a huge PGG chain. I don't know if I can pause this. No, I cannot. Well, there was a game. Wait, whoa, where did we go here? All right, you get to watch this again. The cool thing about this is that, as you'll see in the following breakdown, is that this is an entire dynamic system of a PGG system running a sequence. Where the road is a curve, and based on that curve, the terrain is generated. The dragons are aiming towards based on the road, the soldiers are placed. Based on the soldier's position, the dragon will fly towards the soldiers, and within a certain range, it will breathe fire. Whatever the result of the pyro is, will then be used to swap out the scattered trees with agent trees that can break due to ragdoll, so that the pyro can blow the trees into bits. The pyro is also used as a masking tool for changing the shaders for the ground and for the trees. So I'm swapping out the trees with agents. And they're also creating pyro trails. Like we saw, the agents react to the dragon within a certain distance. Everything collides. But what's really fun about this is that once it's up and running, you basically have a tiny dragon versus knights generator where you can create any size landscape, you can draw a road, put down a few castles, and hit go. And PGG will run through the steps and spit out a fun little scenario, I guess. Just to show that nothing works the first time you do it. Here's a few, I guess, outtakes. You could also call it another shout out to Axiom. But as you can see, some of the pyro went a little overboard. Some of it turned into like, I don't know why there's 20 dragons and the whole forest is on fire. Nor do I know why I had 2,000 knights that needed to be blown to bits. But eventually you sort of find, I was trying to show off the interaction with the knights, but also show off the cool pyro and the forest burning. And it turns out that they're two very different scales. So it was quite hard to figure out. But it's super satisfying to just watch it go. And it's surprisingly also not that slow. Remember the part about me not being crazy? So, crowds and constraints. I found a little example and I learned how to add constraints to crowds. My random test was I took the left leg and pinned it to a point, and then I had an agent hanging in space. I was like, cool, what can I do with that? Oh, I can move the point around. That's neat. I was like, oh, I could point deform the point. What if I had 1,000 points? What if those points were a fox? And it just kind of went a little overboard. You can see some earlier tests where I was like, well, what if I have a transition leading into the fox? And it just became, I don't know what it was. But again, it's just so much fun. The end result you saw with the bear, I actually took the result of the crowd sim and then turned the whole thing into a VDB because I got the idea halfway through that I wanted to test Arnold's subsurface scattering shader as part of this for some reason. But that is why. Yeah. Why not, I guess. Another type of problem, this could have been called problem type number 4, but really sometimes I also just like to play the game. Your supervisor will not ask you for this, but what if they did? So here's a scenario where you get asked to attach drunk agents to other agents. And naturally, you know, the cool thing about the agent relationship node is that you have 2 separate characters with their own animations. You can trigger ragdoll separately and do whatever you want. So I basically made a student simulator. Yeah, it works surprisingly well. And also because of the way that ragdolls have their collisions turned off when they start as intersecting, you don't really get that crazy popping. So like as soon as they exit the other characters' collision shapes, they will then start colliding nicely. But you know, as all clients and supervisors go, they change their mind on a dime. So suddenly they wanted monkeys riding ostriches, naturally. So you know, I accommodated. For good measure, I gave it a sword and shield because you know we're already there. There's no reason to stop now. I mean, who are we kidding? You know, did some sim tests because I figured that would probably be more than one. You know? But again, it's like no. We need Hulk smashing up villages, but it has to be procedural. So the problem I was trying to solve here was I wanted my little Hulk guy to smash up a village, but not just in any way. No matter what layout I made and where I placed him, he would always go to the house closest to him. And once destroyed, that house would then be excluded from the list of available houses, meaning he would always go to the next closest and so forth. So no matter what layout, goes to the closest house, destroys it, goes to the next closest house, and so forth. in reality, the fact that he's jumping and that there's RBD actually has no impact on this at all. It's an agent going to a point, and once it reaches the point, it excludes the point and goes to the next point. That's really all that's happening here. But people keep changing their minds, and it's like, no, let's just use all of it. Let's just also make it R-rated. Murder monkeys. Monkeys with swords and ostriches, finding the nearest human to slay. And for good measure, we added some red particles. But they're like real pack mentality. These things are vicious. Oh no, dude, run. Run. I don't know if he made it. Don't know. But other than I have no excuse, or I don't know how I got there, to be honest. But the setup is a huge amount of fun. The whole idea of having agents basically follow or be attracted to something that is included in a list allows you to do a whole bunch of fun things, such as sheep eating grass, where instead of people, here the grass is basically subdivided into chunks that can be added to a list. Once the chunk has been eaten, it goes on to the next one. But they will clean up the grass one way or another, no matter the shape. Did I mention that I like setting up systems and watching them go? It's very satisfying. You can also play a game of rock, paper, scissors. It's the same principle. There's just the added layer of they've been divided into 3 groups. So each group will target the group that they can basically beat. Paper targeting rock, rock targeting scissors, and scissor targeting paper. And when they get close to the opposite group, they basically convert them. Basically meaning that eventually you'll have a winner because there's only 2 left and one beats the other. It was quite fiddly getting the thresholds right, because I had cases where agents would flip from between all 3 in like a very, very, very quick time. Like it never really actually converted. But once it's up and running, that's a lot of fun. How are we doing for time? Yeah. Some inspiration is also driven by feature requests. It says, sorry, Cameron. It's the lovely Cameron from Side Effects. He seems to be one of the few people that both wants to listen and also understands my many, many hours of ranting and desires. But I basically pestered him for a good 1.5 years to make it easier for us to attach arrows to soldiers. That was sort of like the baseline. Create classic battle scenes, Lord of the Rings. It was actually surprisingly difficult for Houdini to... It was easy enough in RBD to attach, create constraints on the fly, but as soon as you wanted it in the crowd system, then RBD works slightly different. There's slightly different rules. And I just wanted to attach arrows to soldiers. I mean, it couldn't be that hard. But it took a good 1.5 years, and eventually, through some testing and some prototyping, he then buckled, and eventually we got the sticky RBD in, I think it was Houdini 20. And the reason I'm saying, sorry, Cameron, is because this is what I did with it. Yeah. Power plug men.
Sorry, did you say that again?
No. Siri wants to join. Yeah, it's agents triggering ragdoll, forces applied, and by the time they're ragdoll, they're basically just RBD objects anyway. And I think in this case, the head is actually the sticking point, and I just visually remove the head and then have the plug be part of the, it's just following the head joint basically. And then once they're attached to the wall, I place a crooked power point on wherever they land. And as you can see, there were some earlier tests where there's a Dart version of this as well. It doesn't come out quite as nicely, but that's basically the prototype for that. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. So to end is, I want to say, hopefully I've demonstrated that that's a very good reason to do personal projects. They're a lot of fun to do. Just keep it simple. Thank you all.
Have fun with Houdini. Subtitle of this talk. Awesome. Any questions? Yeah.
What is your next plan?
I have I guess we can go there. I still have a desire for combining crowds with flip fluids, but side effects won't allow me to have two-way interaction between RBD and flip, so we're waiting. Maybe Matt can save us. Matt? Axiom flip, please. It's a good question. I always tinker with things constantly. It's only a small portion of it that actually turns into anything. A lot of it is ideas that I try and they horribly fail. And they just don't turn into anything because it simply didn't work or it needed more thought. But I'm open to ideas.
Thank you.
You can submit an RFI. He mentioned Mardini. Mardini is our daily art challenge that happens every March. Every single day, there's a new sort of concept that you have to submit an artwork around. There's daily prizes, there's monthly prizes. There's just feeling good about being part of something that is all creative. The work that gets created is mind-blowing, considering it's generally created each day. It's unbelievable, and artists like Thomas are a key part of that. So, Mardini, watch for it. Play it. Be it. Any other questions?
Did I convince you, or do you just think I'm absolutely batshit?
Thanks, Thomas. Awesome presentation. Thank you.